Welcome, everyone, to the Rational Living Show. I am your host, Dr. Aldo Pucci. So thankful you could join us. This is a weekly show that is broadcast every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern United States time. I am president of the National Association of Cognitive Behavioral Therapists, an association that's based in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. I developed Rational Living Therapy, an approach that focuses on the fact that our thoughts cause our feelings and behaviors. So therefore, if we want to change how we feel and act, we need to change the way we think. I'm author of 2 books, The Client's Guide to Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, which is now in its 2nd edition, and Feel the Way You Want to Feel No Matter What. And you can find both of those books on Amazon.com. This is an interactive show. If you're listening on Podbean, you can use the Podbean app to actually call in with your question. I'd be glad to answer any question that you have. And if you are watching on YouTube or Facebook, X, or LinkedIn, you can type in your questions, and I'll be glad to answer any that you have as well. The title of this week's episode is Stop Fighting the Same Fight, CBT Tools for Better Relationships. Most relationship fights are not really about the surface issue. They are often about the meaning each person gives to the issue. The same fight keeps happening because the same thoughts and assumptions, interpretations, demands, and emotional reactions keep happening. Rational Living Therapy helps people to slow that pattern down, to identify the thinking that fuels the conflict, and to adopt responses that lead to better outcomes. So if you keep having the same argument over and over, the problem may not be the topic, although sometimes it is. The problem may be the thinking pattern underneath the topic. So maybe it's money, or maybe it's chores, maybe it's parenting, maybe it's sex, maybe it's the in-laws. Maybe it's thinking that you're being ignored or criticized, controlled, or underappreciated. Most repeat fights, arguments follow a predictable cycle. Most repeated fights follow a predictable cycle. There's a situation. There's the interpretation of the situation. There is the logical emotion and behavior based on that interpretation. The other person then reacts to your reaction, and then the pattern repeats. So, for example, your spouse looks at their phone while you're talking to them. You think to yourself, they don't care about me, and that's a terrible thing. And that thought then causes depression or anxiety or anger. Then your behavior based on that thought might be something like to accuse them. You never listen to me. Or your spouse perceives that they're being attacked and thinks, here we go again. Nothing I do is ever good enough. Then they withdraw and defend themselves or snap back. Now, the original issue is no longer the phone. The fight has become about rejection and disrespect and blame and self-protection. And by the way, if you're a therapist and you'd like to learn the Rational Living Therapy approach to cognitive behavioral therapy, please visit cbtonlinetraining.com. That's cbtonlinetraining.com. Remember, this is an interactive show, so please feel free to type in your questions if you're watching a video stream, or you can call in with the Podbean app to verbally speak with me. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Now, remember that Rational Living Therapy teaches that events do not create our emotional reactions. Our thinking causes our feelings and behaviors. So now your partner's behavior matters. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but your emotional reaction is caused by what you think about how your partner behaves, what it means to you. For example, you might be aware that your partner is quiet. You think to yourself, they're mad at me and I can't stand that. Or maybe you think they're mad at me and they might leave me and that would be a horrible thing. And then because of that thought, you feel anxious. Or maybe your partner disagrees with you and your thought is, well, they don't respect me. They should respect me. And it's terrible that they don't. And so, how do you feel as a result of that thought? Anger. Or maybe your spouse forgot something and you think to yourself, well, I must not be important to them. And that's a terrible thing. And then you feel depressed as a result of that thought. But before reacting to what your partner did, ask yourself, what am I telling myself that this means? So there are many different ways we can go wrong in our thinking in relation to our spouse, to our partner, in romantic relationships. But there are four main mistakes that damage relationships, mental mistakes. The first one is a mind reading. Now, remember that mind reading is not, he might be thinking this or she might be thinking that. That is not mind reading. That's a guess, that's a hypothesis. That will not create a problem. Mind reading is, I know he's thinking this, I know she's thinking that. And then basing your actions on that so-called knowledge. That's mind reading. So, mind reading is assuming you know what your partner is thinking or intending. For example, well, I know they did that on purpose, or I know he doesn't care, or I know she's trying to control me. That's why she asked me to go do this or that. But rational living therapy asks, what evidence do I have for this interpretation? And that's what you need to do is ask yourself, I know how I'm interpreting what they just said or did, but what evidence do I have that my interpretation is correct? So a helpful replacement would be think a replacement thought would be something like, I cannot know what they intended. I can ask instead of accuse. And that's what I'm going to do from now on. Rather than accusing my spouse, my partner of motivation that I cannot prove and they cannot disprove. How could you ever prove to someone that you weren't thinking something? You can't do it. You can act contrary to it, but it doesn't mean you weren't thinking it. So rather than accusing them of motivation that you cannot prove, they cannot disprove, just stick to the behavior and discuss it. Ask them, hey, I noticed that you acted this way. Could we talk about it? Could you tell me why? And work it out. The second mistake is overgeneralization, and the unintentional exaggeration of the frequency of something, part of overgeneralization. And the words that people most often use when they overgeneralize are words like always and never and every time and nothing and everything. For example, you never listen, or you always make it about yourself, or nothing ever changes, or you never appreciate me. Now, these words usually intensify the argument because the other person starts defending against the exaggeration instead of hearing the concern. So, a better question is to ask yourself is, am I describing this accurately or am I exaggerating because I'm upset? So we want these words always and never to sound off an alarm in our head when we are using those words ourselves, because rarely are always and never accurate. Not never, but rarely are they. Okay, so therefore, so what happens then is if um, if you accuse your spouse, your partner, of never listening to you, they then start thinking to themselves, but wait a minute, maybe I'm not right now, but sometimes I do. Saying I never is quite an accusation. So rather than hearing you out, they get into defense mode, and work at defending just how bad uh, the situation is, and their behavior. So more helpful replacements would be something like, well, it seems like you were not hearing me just now. Or I would like more help with this. Or this has happened several times now. I'd like us to work on it. Okay. Much better, more accurate, and more likely to lead to working it out. Okay. And remember, if you have any questions, be sure to type them in, or concerns. If you're watching the video stream, or call in with the Podbean app, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have. And then the next is personalization, the third mental mistake that often creates difficulties in relationships is personalization. This is assuming your partner's behavior is mainly about you. For example, they're quiet, so I must have done something wrong. Or they forgot, so I must not matter to them. Or they're saying they want space. They're saying they want to be left alone right now, so they must not love me. So it's really a matter of jumping to conclusions, isn't it? But relating it to yourself. So assuming, well, if your partner, your spouse is quiet, that they must be upset with you, or that they necessarily are upset at all. Maybe they have a headache or something. They're not feeling well. So in rational living therapy, we encourage people to ask the question, what are other possible explanations? I know this is what it seems to me right now, that they're quiet because I must have done something wrong. But maybe what are other possible explanations for why my spouse would be quiet? Okay. Maybe it's about stress, or maybe they're tired, or maybe they have something to say, but they just don't know how to say it. But what you don't have to do is turn it into proof that somehow you're not loved, or that there's a problem with your relationship. It could be the case. That could be the case, but refuse to jump to the conclusion that it's about you. Okay. And the fourth is demanding. The fourth mental mistake that causes marital or relationship problems is demanding. This is when preferences become rigid demands. For example, they must agree with me. She should know what I need. Or he has to apologize first. He should. Or they shouldn't ever talk to me that way. Or this has to be resolved right now. In rational living therapy terms, demands often create emotional disturbances. Preferences create flexibility. But, and here's the thing, the reason people often think that something must be a certain way is because they are treating it as if it were air, food, or water, as if they will just die if things do not go the way they think it must be. They must go. So that's why the must create a disturbance, is because they're equating it with some catastrophe, that if it doesn't go this way, something horrific will occur. So, therefore, a great question to ask yourself is, am I turning a strong preference into an absolute demand? What actually will happen if it doesn't go my way? And if I am turning a preference into a demand, why? What catastrophe will I think will happen if it does not go my way? So, a helpful replacement thought would be something like, oh, I strongly prefer to be treated differently than I am or how I've been. And I can communicate that firmly without making myself miserable about it. I only want things to change. I in no way need things to change as if my life depends on it. And remember about the three rational questions we've talked about off and on in the Rational Living Therapy show, or Rational Living show, I mean. And the three rational questions of Rational Living Therapy. The first rational question is my thinking based on fact? So, for example, ask yourself, what do I know for sure and what am I assuming? So, for example, the fact was my spouse was quiet at dinner. My assumption, my spouse must be angry with me. So, what evidence is there that that's actually the case? As a matter of fact, in rational living therapy, we talk about private meanings and public meanings. Okay, so a public meaning is something like if people were there to observe what went on and couldn't read your mind, which obviously they can't, and only observed what happened, all they would see, the public meaning would be that one person was quiet and the other person might have been quiet right along with them and as they were eating. Okay. The private meaning in this case would be something like they're angry at me. So the private meaning is the interpretation. Okay. But the observers, all they would see is two people being quiet as they're eating dinner. Okay. So a more rational thought would be my spouse, my partner was quiet. I can ask what's going on rather than assuming. Remember, the rational question number two is, does my thinking help me to achieve my goals? So ask yourself, what is my goal right now? Is my goal to be right? Is my goal to punish my partner, my spouse, or to win? Or is my goal to understand and to solve the problem? For example, a thought like, well, I'll show them how wrong they are. If you act on that thought, what kind of result are you likely to have? More conflict. So, a better thought, more rational thought in relation to the second rational question would be, well, I want to be heard, but I also want to keep the conversation productive. So, let me calmly approach this. My goal is to not verbally, verbally win some debate or to yell at my spouse or anything like that. My goal is to work things out. And you remember the third rational question is, does my thinking help me to feel the way I want to feel? So a thought like this proves that our relationship is hopeless likely would cause a person to feel depressed if they think that it would be a horrible thing for the relationship to end. So a better thought would be something like, well, this is an unfortunate pattern for sure. But patterns can be changed if we slow them down and work on them. Okay. So what's the difference between a complaint and a character attack? Because often that's what leads to the same argument over and over again. Repeated arguments, repeated fights. A complaint focuses on a behavior. A character attack labels the person. For example, a character attack would be something like, You're selfish. A complaint would be something like, I felt sad when I was talking and you looked at your phone. A character attack would be something like, you're lazy. A complaint would be something like, I really could use your help with some of the housework. A character attack would be something like, you don't care about me. A complaint would be something like, I sure wish we would spend more time, focused time together. So obviously the more you attack character, the less likely you are to solve the behavior, the problem. Not to mention the fact that if I'm trying to encourage someone to act a different way, the last thing I want to do is label them in such a way that leads them to think that this is just who they are. So if I'm trying to encourage someone to get moving, the last thing I want to do is call them lazy, especially if I think that they might buy into that label, right? So it just doesn't make much rational sense to begin with. So one of the things that we can do to disrupt these patterns is to pause before the pattern. Breaking response change is what we call this in rational living therapy. So if you recognize the old fight, that you're about to engage in, well, here we go again. You can say something like, well, let's wait. I think we're getting into that same pattern again. Or, yeah, I want to handle this differently. Could we handle this differently this time? Can we slow this down? Yeah, I'm finding that I'm starting to make myself defensive, and I don't want to do that. I want to understand. And so we can break response chains. Sometimes that involves taking a time out. So you decide, you recognize, you both acknowledge that, hey, we're starting to upset ourselves here, and we might start to say things that will make matters worse, do things that will make matters worse. So let's take a half hour break, 20-minute break, what have you. Go, let's work at talking to ourselves rationally calming ourselves down. And then let's come back and discuss this more calmly. Okay. And by the way, I've begun offering life coaching services. And so to learn more about life coaching from me, Dr. Aldo Pucci, you can visit rational-living-therapy.com for more information. That's rational-living-therapy.com. Okay. So better relationships do not come from never disagreeing. They come from learning how to disagree without destroying your relationship. Rational living therapy helps us to slow down, to question our assumptions, to reduce emotional overreactions, and to communicate in ways that are more likely to produce understanding. Of course, you're not able to control your partner's behavior, and that's a good thing. But you can stop automatically playing your part in the same old fight. And sometimes when one person changes the pattern, the relationship has a real opportunity to change. And that's by working on those assumptions. What do I assume about my spouse? What do I assume about my partner? Am I jumping to conclusions here? And then those mistakes, am I demanding rather than requesting? So don't just ask, what are we fighting about? That's important. Ask, what are we telling ourselves while we fight? This is where change often begins. And it's interesting because in rational living therapy, whenever we do relationship or marital therapy, there are two phases of the therapy of relationship or marital therapy. The first phase is teaching the partners together rational self-counseling skills. And the reason we do that first is because as long as the partners are very angry with each other, they're not in much of a mood to love on each other, to do for each other, especially if they're full of resentments of what has gone on, etc. And so we want to help them to calm down first and to learn how to counsel themselves rationally. And in the process of that, we first teach them about the emotional ABCs and then have them share their emotional ABCs with us. And the interesting thing about this is that often partners really begin to learn about each other because they didn't realize what they think about their partner's reaction, what they think about different situations. They had no idea until they these ABCs were reviewed, and they can hear what their partner's thinking was. So then they think, well, no wonder my spouse reacted that way. Look at how they were thinking. Their thinking was incorrect, but it's no wonder they reacted that way, thinking that way. Okay, so you can learn a lot of wonderful things by reviewing the emotional. I mean, removing the emotional ABCs together. Okay. All right. So this is the Rational Living Show. I am your host, Dr. Aldo Pucci. The Rational Living Show is broadcast every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern United States time. Please be sure to share our podcast with your friends and your family, with your spouse, with your therapist if you have a therapist. Also, please visit our website, nacbt.org, nacbt.org, and cbtonlinetraining.com, as well as rational-living-therapy.com. Thank you all so much for your support, and I look forward to, Lord willing, seeing you all next week at the same time. Everybody take care.